Yo, what is up, guys? Draco Sean here, back with another video. So obviously, new chapter. I'm gonna try to be consistent with this, but we move now. But yeah, let's get straight into this chapter. I mean, if you're looking for just a purely action chapter, I think this chapter hits every nail on the head. I think this is one thing we always criticize Oda. I will say is that he's known for writing a good story and writing good characters, but in terms of fights and action, this is where Oda is very lacking in comparison to other manga authors out there. But I think this chapter was good. I think it's good that we get to see a full-on fight between two powerhouses, because as much as we love Emu, and Emu is a heavyweight, obviously, with potentially now, if for all your power scalers out there, Emu's probably top one for most people. But Loki, I mean, this is going a bit into the power scaling segment for the One Piece community, because I've been keeping up with that for a while now. The way Loki's been hyped up, Loki potentially might be the second strongest character in the world, or even third. He might be top three right now in the world. You could genuinely make that argument. He could be stronger than all the current Yonko. I think the only one that's debatable is him versus Shanks, because I think obviously we don't know what happened between Loki and Shanks, but this chapter for me just solidifies just how strong Loki is. And it just shows you how strong Loki is in comparison to everyone in the previous chapter. Zoro, Sanji, the Giants, like, they're not even on the same level as Loki. Like, Loki's on a different level. And this whole idea now that Loki's gonna join the crew, it's out of the question. He's way too strong. And I think he's definitely stronger than Luffy. I think he has to be stronger than Luffy. I will be very surprised if Luffy is just as powerful as Loki. But Loki in this chapter versus Emu, what a like, just an amazing, just insane stuff we're getting. I think there's a lot of takeaways actually from this chapter actually than I thought actually, because at first it's a purely action based chapter, but we got to see Loki's attacks, we got to see more of Emu, how he uses his abilities. But the one thing that I think is so important is understanding Emu's power system and the reference of his Maki, as he calls it, but it's basically like an evil version of Haki. And he mentions how, it's weird because he's obviously talking in a very in a very interesting way. It's so hard for the readers to understand what he's talking about. But luckily, it's so funny because in the actual manga chat, in the panels, we're actually seeing when he's referencing a power, he's showing a previous event that happened. Like, for example, with when Dory and Broggy were Domi reversed, obviously, and when Harold got the Covenant, they kind of showed that as well. So it's kind of cool. They're giving us little pictures on that. But I think it's so cool that we're learning about Emu's power system. And again, I've said this, Emu is definitely a Lunarian. I think he has to be a Lunarian. It makes sense if he's not a Lunarian. But I think for me, one thing that's so fascinating about this chapter is just understanding how his powers work. And are those powers also a weakness against him? And how does this Maki work? And is he the only one that can use this? Or do the other God Knight and Gorosei use his power as well? Because we haven't seen the Gorosei. We saw them obviously last arc fighting a little bit, but we didn't get to see them really use all their abilities. So I do wonder if they also possess the same thing as Emu and potentially some of the God Knights. But seeing Emu in this chapter fighting was great, and also for Loki as well. He really hypes up Loki as well. But I think the biggest takeaways for me are a couple things. I think the biggest thing that everyone is talking about, and I did hear the spoilers about this, was the Mihawk Emu thing, which I think that's a theory that's been going around for a while because of the eyes and Mihawk's a mystery, and then the whole Nerona being Black Blade. And obviously now this chapter for me, look, I mean, if there's not a connection before, there's definitely a connection now. I think there is definitely going to be a connection. And obviously we've made theories about Mihawk, because obviously the Mihawk and Shanks debate will go on until we actually know who's legit stronger. But one of the theories is that Mihawk was a God Knight like Shanks, and that's where Shanks first met Mihawk. Because remember, Shanks went back to the Holy Land and he met obviously Shamrock, he met Garland as well, and obviously he met Harold there as well. But we don't know if he met any other people there. And maybe one of the people that he met was Mihawk, and I think that makes a lot of sense because they obviously it's a very interesting relationship between the two of them, because we know Mihawk at Marineford, they are friends. Like, they don't hate each other, they are friends. I think they love to have, it's kind of like very similar to Whitebeard and Roger, I feel like, with Mihawk and Shanks. Like, I think they see each other, they'll have a drink, but they'll have a little fight as well. Like, I think it's nothing too serious. But learning more about Mihawk, again, look, I don't know if the theory that Mihawk is Emu's son or not, because that's a big theory. It could be possible. We don't know. I mean, it's so hard because Mihawk is such a mysterious. Mihawk is one of the most mysterious characters still. The only thing that we've learned about in his past is that, and this is from the Viva card to be fair, but which is a bit, that can be a bit wishy-washy sometimes. But the one thing that's always mentioned is that Mihawk, when he was younger, was going around just fighting everyone, apparently, to become the world's strongest swordsman. But one thing that was also mentioned, which I just recently in the Crosskill chapter, was that he was once known as the Marine Hunter. I don't know what that ties into him being a God Knight potentially, but that's something that's interesting because obviously he's called the Marine Hunter, so I have no idea what that means. I think Mihawk is going to be one of those characters that I think when we get into him, it's going to be very fascinating. And I think we're definitely going to get that when he fights Zoro, definitely, because that fight's going to happen regardless. But yeah, the Emu Mihawk theories, I can't really speak too much on it because there's not really much to go on this chapter because all we literally just saw was Emu using an attack called Nemesis, and it was the same position as the way Mihawk used his sword as well. So it's really hard to make the actual, it's hard to go on just based on that. But I think there is a connection, and Oda's maybe teasing it, so we'll see what Oda does in the future with that. But the one thing that I think we have to talk about is this chapter is Emu remembering Joyboy, and it's so hard because we didn't really get to see what Joyboy was saying. We just saw Joyboy laughing because that's literally what he's known for. But we don't know the relationship between Emu and Joyboy. Some theorize that they were friends, which possible. I do think potentially, I think Emu and Joyboy. Again, it's interesting because the name of this chapter was called The God and the Devil. And one reference I made in my last chapter review was that I believe this whole thing of the Void Century kind of ties back to the Holy Bible with the Lucifer and God. And remember, Lucifer was an angel, becomes a fallen angel, rebels against, he rebels against God, then he gets sent down to hell and becomes the devil. And I do wonder if it's very similar to that. Because one thing that's so interesting about the Void Century backstory is we don't know how Davy Jones fits into this, because we now know that Davy D. Jones is a separate person to Joyboy. They're not the same person. Joyboy is a separate entity to Davy D. Jones. So I think, because when we think about the Void Century, obviously Joyboy is going to be the main character. Emu is going to be an essential character. And there's going to be other characters, like obviously Lily's going to be an important character. But one character now that's just been introduced to us now that's also going to be very important is Davy D. Jones. And remember what Rock said about Davy D. Jones being king of the world. And again, I think my theory now with the God and the Devil thing and this whole thing of Emu's kind of like Lucifer potentially, I think that's really fascinating. And I do wonder if, because it's funny because in this chapter, Emu literally refers to himself as the devil, because it's funny because Loki says, oh, this is like making a deal with the devil, and Emu's like, oh, well, this is because there's no difference really between a god and a devil. So he's not hiding it, and he wants to be both, to be fair, because he acts like a god, and he's also the devil as well. But I think that theory that Emu rebelled against Davy D. Jones is looking very possible. And to be fair, we don't know much about Davy D. Jones. That's the thing that's so fascinating as well. Maybe Davy D. Jones was an actual tyrant, maybe. We don't know. Maybe he was a good guy. Because I think the most fascinating thing is we would assume Emu's the villain, but maybe there's a twist on it. And also, there was another theory I did hear that there's a difference between Emu and Mu. And the theory is that Mu has possessed Emu, which is a possibility as well. And that's why when Emu speaks sometimes, he always speaks in like third person. But why is that the case? Well, maybe it's because they're not the same person. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe Emu actually is a good guy, but the actual person who's possessing Emu is a villain. So I think that's the interesting thing, because Emu is a villain. But I think the interesting thing about this chapter, which I liked also, is that we get to see Emu express emotion, whether it's his malicious smile at the end of the chapter, but also when he's screaming out Joyboy's name. I couldn't believe that page. I was like, what the hell? He really is thinking about Joyboy. And I think when we get to this Void Century backstory, it's going to explain so much between their relationship. Because I think Emu, Davy D. Jones, and Joyboy are going to be the three essential figures in this backstory, definitely. Because I think they all have a role to play. And I think the biggest piece of mystery is, I think, Davy D. Jones. And how the Elbaf giants fit into this as well. Because again, Emu's also in this chapter referencing the Nidhogg. So I do wonder how that plays into it as well. The Nidhogg, and obviously we're gonna see Luffy fight Emu as well. So again, really good chapter, I think. I think Emu right now, I'm really enjoying this. I've said this, I really want Emu to come in there and decimate the Straw Hats. Not kill them, because I don't think that's ever gonna happen. I think it'll be a twist if it did happen. But I do think the tension in this arc is getting raised, and I like that. That's what I'm loving about Emu turning up right now, is the tension is there. I don't want this tension to be ruined by lovey-dovey happy endings and banquets. This is now an arc where I feel like something has to go down. Like, this is where it gets real. It gets real, man. It gets real. And I do want to see what happens with this chapter, because, you know, with this arc, obviously, because I think this arc is on course to be the best arc in the post-time skip. And potentially it can go one step higher as well, potentially, because I'm really liking Emu. I think this is already the best flashback in One Piece. I think this Elbaf flashback is the best flashback by far. I think it is. And it's because it's produced some of the best characters and everything, and the lore and everything. It's perfect, and I can't wait for that to get animated, by the way. But in terms of this flashback, sorry, in terms of this arc, I think we're on course for an absolute banger, and I can't wait for it. I'm very excited, and we'll see what happens. But it's not a very long chapter. It's a very good chapter, I think. I would probably give this chapter a 10 out of 10 actually, because I enjoy the action actually. And the little references between Mihawk and Emu, and I think the biggest thing is Emu thinking about Joyboy and what their relationship was like. But again, I still believe that Davy Jones was the king, and he could have been a tyrant, and maybe Emu rebelled against him. But who knows? I might be wrong. That's the whole point of theorizing. You get it right, you get it wrong. It is what it is. But anyway, guys, I'm gonna try and post another video this week because I think we're on break potentially. So I'm gonna try and post something this week, just outside of all this stuff, kind of referencing my thoughts maybe on other arcs and stuff. But yeah. Anyway, that's the video. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace out. Have a good day.